the meeting. I'll just go through the housekeeping and then I'll hand over to you, Chair, for the rest of the agenda. Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Shared Regulatory Services Joint Committee on Wednesday, 25th of September. Before we start the meeting proper, I'm just going to go through a short housekeeping list and introduction, and then I'll hand over to the Chair. So hopefully you can all hear me, and I'll make a start with the housekeeping. May I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. If a participant wishes to speak, can they please raise their hand in person, sat in the chamber? Please raise their hand or use the remote raise hand function. When invited to address by the Chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. So I'd like to welcome all the members of the committee and officers, and to anyone else watching the live meeting broadcast. And now I'll hand over to the Chair, Councillor Mackie. Thank you, Chair. Hi, Councillor Mackie. Can I just hand back over to you now to start the meeting, please? Thank you.
Apologies, I forgot to put on my voice. Yes, welcome to the meeting, everyone. And part one of the agenda is apologies for absence. As far as I'm aware, we've not received any apologies from members, so we should all.
Sorry, Councillor Mackie, I've had one apology from Councillor Michael from Cardiff.
Oh, right. Oh, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Councillor.
And second item is the minutes of the annual meeting held on the 19th of June 2024. Can we all agree that it is an accurate record of the meeting? And can we agree on that? Yeah. Nothing coming up to say we can't.
I think Councillor Drake had a hand up, Chair, so I think hopefully she's just putting her hand up to second that. I
think it was to second, yeah. And are there any matters arising from them? No, can't see anything.
One thing, Chair, I was going to point out that I believe I might have omitted out of the previous minutes was you made a declaration during the meeting. If committee are happy to approve the minutes subject to that being put onto these minutes about your declaration, if that's okay.
That's fine. Yeah. And are there any declarations of interest for the meeting today? No. Lovely. Then we go on to the report then. That's item 4, overview and update on shared regulatory services. And we've got 3 reports to consider today. The first of which is agenda item 4, the overview and update. And Helen will be presenting this report. So we will, and then she'll bring in officers to speak on it. So shall we hand over to Helen to take us through item 4, please?
Thank you, Chair. I must apologise from the outset that I have got the lurgy, or I had the lurgy, so my voice probably isn't the strongest that it could be today. If I can take members to section 2 of the overview and update report, very familiar format for you, and just to touch on some human resources matters initially. We normally report on sickness absence, and you'll see that there's been a slight increase in both the short-term and long-term sickness absence across the service. in quarter one when compared to quarter one of 2023-24. There are no particular reasons for this which have emerged, and no trends are discernible. And if you look back to quarter one of 22-23, that is a higher level. So potentially 23-24 was a low level. So comparing it to that, I don't think we've got a particular issue arising, but clearly we will keep monitoring that throughout the year. A little bit on our growing our own approach, which we talk to members about at each meeting. And as you're aware, this is really to put us in the best possible position, given the difficulties generally across Wales and further afield in recruiting suitably qualified officers. So the growing our own approach continues, and a number of members of staff have got qualifications or partway through qualifications. And we've started the next chapter actually this month with 3 additional members of staff on a match-funded basis, starting their MScs in environmental health. So great for staff development and, of course, for building resilience into the service. In the annual report presented to Joint Committee at the AGM in June, we mentioned the fact that we were looking to make some amendments to job titles and the reasons behind that. That's summarised again in 2.5 of the paper. So I'm really pleased to advise that those changes are being made for very good reason. And all being well, they will take effect from the 1st of October. So, for example, a neighbourhood services officer or a commercial services officer would now be an environmental health officer, a commercial services officer for trading standards would become a trading standards officer, and then the equivalent technical officer titles would also reflect either the environmental health or the trading standards profession. So we're taking the opportunity at the same time to amend the titles of 2 of the SRS sectors, really to convey a little bit more succinctly exactly what those sectors represent, what their remits are. And you'll see in 2.7 the fact that we will be changing neighbourhood services to environmental protection and licensing, commercial services to health and public protection, and enterprise and specialist services will remain as it is. So that means that 2 of the operational manager job titles will be amended. So for Will, he will become operational manager environmental protection and licensing, and for Christina, she'll become the operational manager health and public protection. So my voice is just about holding out here, but it's probably a good point for me to ask if there are any questions at this stage, which I'm happy to answer before I pass to Gemma for the financial position.
I think you're on mute, Chair. Sorry.
Oh, Councillor Lewis, would you like to come in? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Helen, is there what's happening with the apprenticeships now?
It's been quite a long journey, Councillor Lewis, as you know. We've reported on progress over a number of years now. Some positive news to report, which I think we reported in the annual general meeting in June, is the fact that we now have what they call a designated qualification. So there is on the Qualifications Wales website a qualification called the Level 4 Diploma in Regulatory Compliance. So that meant that we were then able to complete something called the pathway template document once that qualification was in place. And I'm very hopeful, there's some positive news last week, in fact, very hopeful that that is now progressing through the new organisation, MEDIR, and training providers will now be engaged to discuss how this is going to roll out. So we are edging closer, that's for sure.
Thank you. That's good news.
It is. Thank you.
I don't think we got any other questions.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair. So if I may pass now to Gemma for the financial position, and then it will be operational managers coming in after Gemma.
Lovely. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Chair. So obviously very, very early in the financial year for the Q1 monitoring, but the forecast position is with a £221,000 overspend, and that's broken down as a core overspend of 76,000 and then an overspend of 145,000 in the authority specific services. And I think in recent years we have seen that overspend in authority specific services, but we've also got this emerging overspend in core in 24-25, which I'm sure members will have seen across kind of wider local authority budgets as well. So included within this forecast is the usage of the reserve funding, and that's to support a post within the food service. And there's a report later on the agenda that sets out some of those establishment pressures that are being experienced within the food team. But the total drawdown on the reserve for that purpose is £47,000. In terms of the Bridgend authority specific position, there's a smaller underspend being forecast there of 39,000. And again, that reflects the kind of historic trend we've seen. And within Cardiff, there's a forecast overspend of 203,000. Again, not a significant divergence from where we've been in previous years. And the Vale of Glamorgan is forecasted an underspend of £5,000. In terms of the core services, the £76,000 overspend position can be broken down as follows. So we've got an 8,000 underspend forecast within animal services, an overspend of 16,000 in environmental services. The food services area currently has a forecast overspend position of 116,000, and it's noted within the report that the resource shortage in terms of the budget position compared with the levels that the Food Standards Agency, hopefully I've got that right, Helen, set out. Housing services are forecast an overspend position of 63,000, and this is due to additional salary expenditure that's required to meet service area demands. Health and safety and communicable disease budget has a 49,000 overspend. And again, that's being driven by a temporary increase in staff costs, but also some business support within the service. Pollution services are forecasting a £56,000 underspend, and the trading standards budget is forecasting an underspend of 103,000. So lots of overs and unders across the core services, but there are some specific staffing pressures within the service. So those are the main points I was going to draw out on the report. Happy to take any questions.
Again, we don't appear to have any questions. I think it was all noted, very clearly. So I think we understand what's happening there.
Thank you, Chair.
So I think, yeah. Will, I think, is next, is it?
Yeah, I think we're going to do the performance monitoring next, Councillor Mackie. And normally we start with Christina. She takes us through the various food and trading standards performance. Okay. I tend to come in at the end. So I think probably Christina will start.
Thank you.
Thanks, Will, and morning, Chair, morning, everyone. I don't think we were proposing this time to go through performance line by line, only that you're so used to us in terms of how we go through. So it was really you obviously have the information in your packs. You have the information there in terms of, for a start, the food service. So I'll offer, if there's any questions that we can answer. You'll see from the reported stats, we've made a good start in terms of the financial year ahead, and we'll go more into detail in terms of the planned programme for the year later on in the agenda with the Food Law Enforcement Service Plan, which I'll be presenting. You'll see that trading standards in terms of new businesses, where we are showing a slightly red at the moment, but I'm anticipating that this will be sort of reflected better in the later part of the financial year. One other service area for me is in relation to MEES, the Minimum Energy Efficiency Scheme. You'll see that we haven't reported any stats this time, and that's because the team are really getting ready now for the next stage of that bit of work in terms of enforcement and compliance notices to be served to those properties that are not in compliance, so the F and G rated properties. So, as I said, we weren't planning on going through this line by line, so I'd invite members, if there's any questions in terms of performance for my areas, happy to take questions at this time.
No, I think Christina, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think.
I'll just come back in very briefly then, Chair. For noise and air pollution, there's generally a really positive set of performance figures. As you see, they're exceeding their target, the teams, for domestic noise complaints, and for them challenging commercial response times, where we aim to make contact within a day. We are virtually compliant there, just a couple of complaints, which are mainly due to some administrative issues with logging of complaints. So positive from that respect. And then my licensing teams, you're used to seeing a suite of green, and you'll see from your papers that is the case, apart from one application in Cardiff where it was deferred really at the request of the applicant. So those are the kind of licensing and pollution response times and performance figures. So again, unless there's any questions from members, I'm happy to hand back to Christina, who I think is going to take us through a few items before I come back in at a later date then.
Christina, are you coming back in? You're muted, I'm afraid.
Muted, Christina.
I'll be taking you through the communicable disease service plan now, Councillor Mackie. So I'll do that bit next. And to note, there is a note in the recommendations in terms of this plan as well. So I'm sure you'll cover that at the end. So just to take you through very briefly, the CD plan, or the communicable disease plan, we produce it every year to inform residents and joint committee about the work of the team. The team is ultimately there to protect individuals from harm by reducing incidence of communicable disease across the region. We also work really closely with stakeholders to promote health improvement strategies. You'll see that on page 10 of the plan, we have the full scope of the service, which describes our surveillance activities, public health interventions, epidemiological studies, our enforcement, advice and training. You'll also note we detail, as we do in every plan, the resource involved in providing this service. And we've also detailed this year the health protection service, which is an add-on area to the service, which is fully funded and cost recovered by the Health Board, but also provides real advantages to us as a service in terms of contributing to other statutory work that we have ongoing. The plan details an action plan for the financial year ahead, which is detailed at page 17. We, of course, need to be mindful of the impending special procedures regime, which we've briefed you on previously. and it'll be this team that undertakes all of the compliance checks in terms of the traders that regime falls in line with, and of course a really busy year ahead in terms of that regime. Page 32 of the CD plan details some of the team's achievements in the last financial year. And again, you know, this really is, despite being a small team, really high performing in terms of some of the things that we achieve every year. But things to be mindful of are the prosecutions in terms of smoke-free requirements, which relate to non-compliant shisha bars, enforcement of breaches of sunbed regulations. You'll recall we've briefed you on that previously. Support to local barbers in Bridgend, where we had issues in terms of ringworm, and advice and guidance to local universities through our student liaison officer. And of course, we continue with our nutritional training for our Healthy Options Award. So, as I said, this report really is to apprise members of the work of our team, set out the action plan for the year ahead, but of course, like I said, to be mindful of the up-and-coming special procedures regime, which will really impact on that team. So happy to take questions on that plan. It's detailed there in Appendix 3, and it may be worth, Councillor Mackie, that I pause at this point and take any questions, should there be any on the plan.
We seem to be very quiet.
Yeah, if you're happy, Councillor Mackie, we've done a good job. If there's no questions, that's great.
I think you have done an exceptional job. I mean, the report shows how much work has gone into this. Fantastic. Well done indeed.
Lovely.
I'll let you move on.
I can see that Councillor Drake there has got a hand up, or is a clapping sign. I'm not sure if there's a question.
No,
there.
I just wanted to say, you mentioned ringworm. I haven't heard about that for years. So is it on the increase or something?
We did have a spate of activity in terms of some barbershops in Bridgend, all to do with a certain style of haircut that was being provided. And of course, we had to give some advice and guidance really in terms of cleaning and disinfection of the tools utilised in that practice. So yes, we did have a flurry of activity in terms of ringworm, but hopefully that situation is now under control. But yeah, certainly an interesting couple of cases to deal with there.
Oh, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Drake. Okay, so staying with me for the next couple of paragraphs. Again, this is just to make joint committee members aware of a project intervention that was undertaken by the same team, but the health and safety element of that team. And that relates to electrical safety in hospitality settings, really looking at the outdoor areas, which became very popular, of course, during COVID times and the restrictions there, but have continued on from there. So I won't do the full detail. It's all there for you to read. But just to note the project that was conducted throughout the SRS region, and of course that 1/5 of the premises were found to be using non-compliant equipment, and of course officers have needed to give advice and guidance. That now has informed some of our activities in terms of the year ahead, and we are conducting interventions to look at that work even further to make sure that all premises are compliant. But just for information purposes only, that was a focus of attention last year, and the full report should be there for you to read. I think, Chair, I'm passing back to other colleagues now. I believe it's Will next.
Thanks, Chris. So very briefly from me, Chair, just a reminder that the Grenfell inquiry published its final report recently. Welsh Government has repeated its commitment to introduce a building safety bill, and then officers, as previously reported, are continuing to work with the Welsh Government in that regard. Turning to private sector housing, I've previously discussed the demands being faced by our teams across the region. And so I'm pleased to say we have the two team managers, Helen Pembridge, who manages the Bridgend and Vale of Glamorgan teams, and Steve Tudball, who manages our Cardiff teams. Now, at the end of this report, this update report, they've prepared some fairly graphic slides, hopefully not too graphic, which are going to be able to take members through some of the challenges faced by their teams across their respective areas. Slightly different because obviously Cardiff is a capital city and you have the, all the sort of intensive student housing areas that we have there. Helen's teams obviously cover some of the more valley communities, but they deal with the same legislation and there are some commonalities around hoarding. So there's quite a bit of information they're going to go through, and obviously they'll be more than happy to take any questions that you may have at that point. Finally, from me, as the report identifies in 2.21, members will note a separate paper on the housing specific annex of the compliance and enforcement policy. So that is attached for members, and Helen will be taking you through that at agenda item 6, along with some changes that have been made to represent the ME's work. So really it's just setting the scene for Helen and Steve to come in at the end of the report. But obviously if there are any questions at this point, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I'll pass you over to Jason, who's going to be taking you through some animal health and welfare matters. Okay, I'll pass over to Jason if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Morning, members. Just to give an update on some animal health and welfare work under the Protecting the Environment theme. As members will be aware, each year the RSPCA recognises the work that organisations make to contributing an unwavering commitment to protecting, promoting and enhancing animal welfare. So once again, we've applied for what are known as the Paw Print Awards. These are national awards provided by the RSPCA. And we've been recognised in 3 categories, namely the stray dog provision, the animal-related licensing work, and our kennelling work for the stray dog provisions. These awards have been recognised, and we've improved on last year's performance by achieving the Platinum Award this time for the stray dog provision. This is a new category that was introduced last year and recognises any organisation that has undertaken and achieved a gold standard award for 5 years or more. So we've now achieved that for the stray dog provision. And I believe that we are the only service or organisation in Wales that has been awarded a platinum award in any of those categories. So just really recognising the hard work and commitment that both our animal health and welfare team and our animal wardens have achieved through their work and commitment over the course of the last year. Paragraph 2.23 to 2.26 is just providing members of an update of a current outbreak of what is known as a blue tongue virus. This is a notifiable disease. Currently, there are no cases in Wales. However, large parts of the east of England have been declared as restricted zones, given the number of outbreaks and identification of the disease. So as I said, this is a notifiable disease, and it's a legal requirement that any suspicion or detection of the disease is reported to the Animal Plant Health Agency. It's a viral disease affecting sheep, cattle, goats, deers, llamas, and alpacas. It doesn't affect horses or pigs. The symptoms that can vary between species, but includes sort of fever, lesions, redness around the mouth and nose, reddening the skins, and also some animals will actually, have a blue tongue, hence the name of the virus. The disease is spread by adult infected midges biting any of the animals, and obviously then giving them the disease. So it's classed as what we call a vector-borne transmission. And the infected midges can spread locally and more widely in certain temperature and wind conditions. So it's suspected that this is blown over from the continent, given current wind wind conditions that have occurred sort of end of summer and early autumn, and DEFRA have now actually licensed 3 vaccines to be used for this, and farmers can apply to get the vaccines for the animals. It doesn't actually cure the animals, it just suppresses the symptoms. And just one sort of note of positivity of this, I suppose, that there is no actual public health risk. The virus does not impact human beings or the animal products such as meat or milk. Local authorities would have a responsibility to enforce blue tongue legislation. At the minute, that in terms is really looking at sort of ensuring farmers follow the restrictions put in place in terms of movement, and requiring the appropriate licenses to allow movements. And any non-compliance would need to be addressed by the local authority, investigated, and appropriate powers used therein. So at this stage, this is more just a notification. We will be sort of putting some communications out for our farmers just to make them aware. But as I said, at this stage, there is no cases in Wales, but that's not to say that infected midges could be travelling in vehicles that are coming out of any of these areas that are impacted. So really high vigilance needs to be maintained by our farmers and our officers working on the field. Really. So I'll pause there very briefly if there's any questions that members may have on either the RSPCA awards that we've achieved or any further information on the blue tongue virus outbreak in England at the minute.
Can I just congratulate you again on the awards? I mean, again, exceptional work. Fantastic. And how likely is it with the outbreak that the midges will come into Wales? I mean,
yeah, it's very difficult. You know, the DEFRA and APFRA doing detailed monitoring. We're getting almost daily updates from ACSO, which is the Association of Chief Officers of Trading Standards, where basically the information in the report that was published last week has changed a little bit. The actual restricted zone has grown, and they've amalgamated into one large zone. Basically, that occurred over the weekend. Hopefully, the midges only survive in certain temperatures. So hopefully we get into the colder months, Chair, the risk of it should dissipate, basically, as they won't be able to survive the cold weather. But that's not to say that we could have a few more milder months into October, November. So we'll just have to keep an eye on it and clear close attention. There's a large meeting happening on Teams on Monday, nationally, basically giving an update on the current situation. So we'll have further information on that as well.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions? Doesn't appear to be. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, so just a little further update on me moving to our supporting the local economy theme. And members be aware at our last meeting, obviously we report on the problems of illicit tobacco and illegal vapes. And illegal tobacco continues to be a really significant problem in our communities. The report there from the research shows that smokers are quite comfortable in purchasing illegal tobacco and cigarettes, with at least 15% of products supplied in Wales being illegal. So it is remaining a high item agenda, more intelligence coming through, and we continue to investigate intelligence as it comes through. Obviously, criminal activity is the main focus on illicit tobacco, and most illicit tobacco is done through organised crime gangs. Members will recall at the last meeting that the Operation Usk investigations were a new way that we looked to tackle the problem around the SRS area. And whilst we identified originally this was happening in Cardiff a number of years ago, this case expanded and involved outlets in both Bridgend and the Vale, and a really detailed, complex, organised crime gang was uncovered and investigated. When the case was, given the size of this case, when it was actually brought to court, and the size of the number of defendants and the sheer size of the case, the trial was split into two. So that has now finally concluded in July, with the guilty pleas and guilty defendants being found guilty, and just really highlighting really for members to make them aware that as we sort of announced when the sentencing was made, immediate imprisonment for some of the gang members of 6 defendants of 27 years and 4 months, and the remaining 5 defendants having up to 9 years suspended sentence. So really, this is just it shows just really the seriousness of this case, the fraudulent activity, and the level of criminal activity involved in this, and due justice was served on this, really. I think I maybe hang over to Christina she's going to update on other activities we've done around illicit tobacco and a particular project, or not project as such, but a particular enforcement activity we've undertaken in terms of closure orders.
Thanks, Jason. And yeah, very much staying on the illicit and illegal tobacco theme. I'm at paragraph 2.30, which is in relation to a closure order. So members will be aware that there are distinct premises within the area that cause real nuisance in terms of illegal sales of tobacco, illegal tobacco and illicit tobacco. And the service has undertaken lots of enforcement activity in the past in terms of seizures, trying to take the goods off the market. And that often results in prosecution. But unfortunately, these premises are restocking the illegal goods very soon after those seizures have been conducted. So this year, the Trading Standards team achieved its first ever closure order under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act. The Act is a bit different, and it provides powers to issue a closure notice on premises which are being used to commit a nuisance or disorder. And then that notice is followed up with a court hearing where we make an application which is made into an order. And the evidential test there is disorderly or offensive criminal behaviour, serious nuisance to the public, or disorder near the premises. Our application for this pictured premises in your report was we were able to demonstrate the repeated period of offending and our efforts in trying to achieve compliance. So the order was granted for a period of 3 months, and the department has provided some further evidence to support a further extension of that order. So we've had a 6 months total closure order for that premise. We're continuing with that piece of work in terms of closure orders, and there's 2 further closure orders hopefully coming soon and working their way through the process. So again, just a bit of an update in terms of the different activities that's going on. And I believe I'm passing back to Helen now to continue with the report.
Thanks, Christina. That's great. So taking members now to 2.32, making the best use of resources, and just to advise the outcome, as we always do, of the 2 main audits that we've had undertaken this year. So the first of those is the SRS Governance and Financial Controls Audit for the 23-24 financial year. So undertaken by the Regional Internal Audit Service. The purpose of the audit is to provide necessary assurance to Joint Committee that financial controls and governance are operating effectively and in compliance with the Council's policies and procedures. So for this audit, the service was awarded an audit category of reasonable assurance, which means that there's a generally sound system of governance, risk management and control in place across the service. And that is echoes the result that we've had in previous years on that particular audit. A number of low priority and 2 medium priority recommendations came out of this year's audit, and steps are in place to implement the actions to answer those recommendations. The second of the 2 major audits is in relation to the Wales Illegal Money Lending Grant, again for the 23-24 financial year. And for this particular audit, a category of substantial assurance was awarded, which means that a sound system of governance, risk management and control exists, with internal controls operating effectively and being consistently applied. And there were no recommendations for improvement on that second audit. I'm happy to pause there, Chair, if there are any questions on that. Otherwise, I will move on to 2.36.
I think you're okay to move on. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you.
And
so
well done on the audit.
Yeah, it's always good to get those results in, Chair.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So moving to 2.36, again, sticking with the theme, strategic theme of making the best use of resources, something which, we've spoken about on a number of occasions, but again, to reiterate the fact that there are a number of new areas of enforcement and regulation which will become the responsibility of the service. We spoke about tobacco a little bit earlier, and we're waiting to see how the tobacco and vapes bill will materialise when that sees its way through the Westminster process. But in addition to that, members will be familiar with the special procedures regime, licensing regime, which we have spoken about for a number of years now, waiting for implementation, and it is looking more and more likely that the current date of implementation that Welsh Government is working to, i.e. the end of November this year, will actually become a reality. So behind the scenes, we're working to get the necessary infrastructure in place to be able to deliver on that. And then another interesting area of work which looks to be coming our way is in relation to the promotion and placement of food. And I've included at 2.37 some bullet points to explain some of the ways in which that legislation would take place. Things like the position of food and drink, which is high in fat, salt and sugar, just get it right. With that, those foods can be positioned in larger stores, i.e. they can't be too close to the checkout and they can't be too close to the entrance. There are other things which that legislation would bring in. For example, restricting buy one get one free type offers on those products, and prohibiting the practice of free refills of high sugar drinks in restaurants. So, as we always say on these occasions, in 2.38, lots coming our way, but with no additional funding. So that tension in terms of being able to pick up and deliver on that work alongside our existing responsibilities. Happy to pause there if there are any questions on those new responsibilities. Otherwise, I'll move on to 2.3.
I'd just like to ask really, with no extra staff or resource for others, I mean, that's a phenomenal amount of work, I would have thought, unless you're just going to go on reports from maybe the public complaining that, because you won't have the staff to inspect, would you, that every shop?
So it may be something that we can combine with existing inspection workload.
Right, yeah.
But you're right. Something has to give. Either we can't deliver as fully as perhaps we would like, or we have to reprioritise other things. But we will give that detailed thought as and when those new responsibilities come to us.
Mm-hmm. Good luck for that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you do remarkably well as it is. Yeah, but I can see the purpose of it all, and the reason for doing it. But maybe we should lobby a little bit to see if we can get some extra money.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And then just to come down to 2.39, enforcement activity, and our usual Appendix 5, which looks at the prosecution cases which concluded since April. So it's between April of this year and the end of August. Actually, 7 cases concluded, one of which is Operation Usk, which Jason has already taken us through. 2 food hygiene prosecution cases, two health and safety at work prosecution cases, one of which you will see at number 3 in the schedule, which was a case where a heavy gate fell onto a worker at a Cardiff premises, and you'll see that the court fined the company concerned a large amount of £45,000 plus other fines associated with that. We also had a private sector housing case conclude, and a product safety case, which is the last one listed in the schedule, which is again quite a different one. We tend to deal with product safety through advice to achieve compliance. On this occasion, that advice, very detailed advice, wasn't taken on board by the trader, and the prosecution resulted. But you'll see in the detail there that they were actually banned substances in cosmetic products that this business was supplying. They were products not intended for the UK market, and so they didn't comply with product safety law. So perhaps small in number for this stage in the year at 7, but there are an awful lot in the pipeline, but some really, really good cases have concluded in court. So, Chair, I've come to the end of what I wanted to present in the report. We need, obviously, to deal with the recommendations. So I'm not sure if you'd like to do that now or after Helen and Steve have done their presentation.
Well, I think we could do it now, and then we can have the presentations afterwards. So the recommendation is that the Joint Committee is asked to consider, note and agree the contents of this report, to approve the 2024-25 communicable disease plan, and to authorise the head of shared regulatory services to make administrative amendments to the communicable disease plan 2022-25 should the need arise. Are members happy to accept that recommendation?
I'll move,
Yeah.
Chair.
Thank you. And the second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favour? Yeah. No dissenters. Lovely. Here we are. The recommendations agreed. And so if we move on to the item 5 then.
Sorry, Chair, it'll be the presentation now from...
Presentation, sorry. Yes, sorry.
And I think Mark is going to be helping us load the slides for that presentation.
Yeah, just to check,
Thank you, Mark.
we've got 2 presentations from the 2 relevant officers, Helen and Steve. So I'm just wondering who wants to start first, because there's 2 separate ones.
I believe it's Helen, Mark.
Okay, fine. I'll just get that loaded up now. Bear with me.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's coming up for everyone. And Helen, when you're ready, we'll go for the slides.
Thank you, Mark, and good morning, everyone. Today, I'm going to discuss 3 areas of work that are carried out by my team. So it's housing disrepair in the private rented sector, issues relating to owner-occupied properties, and some cases in relation to rats and rubbish. So if you can just pause on that slide then, Mark, that'd be lovely, thanks. On the next one, sorry. Okay, so we've seen an increase in requests for assistance in the private rented sector, and as well as contact from tenants, we also receive referrals from a number of other agencies. These can include social workers, housing solution teams, the police, fire service, GPs, and Rent Smart Wales. Increases incurred as a result of a number of factors, but I think two of the main ones include the introduction of the Rent in Homes Act, which was a new piece of legislation in Wales. And also there was a tragic case of a 2-year-old boy in Manchester whose death was directly linked to the exposure to mould in his family's flat. I believe these have raised awareness of housing issues, and they've also raised expectation of tenants as well. The most common hazards in homes that we witness are damp and mould and excess cold, and these can be particularly prevalent in the valley areas in Bridgend, whereas in Barry we also see fire safety issues in some of the large poorly converted buildings in the town centre. We find cases are becoming more complex. There's a breakdown in relationships between landlords and tenants, and there's a number of factors that are influencing these. The financial pressures, lack of availability of good quality housing, the cost of repairs, and the availability of contractors. In some cases, we're having tenants refusing access for repairs to be carried out, and this can be on the advice of the no-win, no-fee types of services. This, along with a shortage of good contractors complete work, is resulting in tenants having to live in unsatisfactory accommodation for longer. And so generally, we are able to achieve compliance through informal enforcement notices, but we'll proceed to formal action where necessary for non-compliance. The new housing enforcement policy, which has been mentioned, will outline to both tenants and landlords what they can expect from us and what we expect from them. And it also supports officers in their decision-making process. Mark, if you could just go back to the previous slide then, because that's part of them. So as well as the private rented sector, we also receive complaints from tenants in social housing. We always advise them to discuss the issues with their housing provider first, but unfortunately, due to lack of progress of works and poor communication, we are having to carry out formal inspections. This sometimes then leads on to the service of formal notices. We're often having to chase up matters with RSLs to ensure that works are going to be completed. So just looking at the photographs now, Mark, could you just go back a few photographs then? Yeah, and just back again. Thank you. So you can see from some of the photographs there's different extremes of dampness, but on this particular side you can see the extent of the mould growth, and this is what leads to a particularly serious hazard then and can affect in particular children with regards to respiratory diseases then. If you move on to the next slide then, Mark, please. So this was a property where originally there was a leak in the roof then. This defect wasn't reported to the landlords and it caused some severe damage as it happened over a period of time. The only reason we became aware of this property was that the house was being repossessed and the tenant presented as homeless then to the housing solution teams. So it's then the housing solution teams that flagged it up to us. Unfortunately, as the earlier disrepair hadn't been reported, it resulted in quite severe damage and it led to the service of prohibition order with the tenant then being rehoused then. You can go on to the next slide now then, please. You can see there the dangerous electrics as well, and also due to the disrepair to the banister there, that poses a hazard if there's young children and it can be falls between levels then. So that's it. If you can go on to the next slide then, Mark. So another growing area of work for us is in relation to the owner-occupied sector, and homeowners can often lack the funds to maintain their homes, which can result in them living in extremely poor conditions. We find elderly homeowners may lack confidence in appointing contractors due to concerns regarding their reliability and the quality of their work. So we advise and signpost the owner-occupiers to other agencies such as Care and Repair and Nest Warm Homes programme, and also social services where this is appropriate. Nest can give advice on making homes more energy efficient and making sure people are on the best energy and water tariffs. They can also provide free energy efficiency measures, such as improving insulation and free boiler replacement for those on low income or with certain health conditions, such as respiratory disease or dementia. Also then, Care and Repair can give advice on repairs, home safety, and provide a handy person scheme, and also details of contractors that are safe to use, and they're also available to undertake benefit checks. As well as issues of disrepair, we're now seeing an increase in hoarding cases. The majority we've dealt with recently have been in the owner-occupied sector. The resident can often present really well, their appearance can be fine, but the living conditions extremely poor. Hoarding is a complex issue to deal with, as the resident can need support to prevent reoccurrence. Officers have attended specialist training, and in Bridgend, along with Cwm Taf Magarnwg, there is a self-neglect panel where we refer cases and we discuss them and come up with multi-agency solutions. So you can see from these photos on the screen, the first two relate to a property where a gentleman was living there. He was actually going down to the leisure centre to use the shower facilities there, and he presented very well, was always very well dressed, very smart. We had a complaint from the neighbour that dampness was being caused, and as a result of our investigations, we obtained a warrant. And on entering the property, then these are the conditions we found. And you can see in the second photo, that is actually where his kitchen was then. We liaised with social services and some voluntary agencies. Unfortunately, again, the property had to be prohibited, but the gentleman was rehoused. The property was cleared, put up for auction. I'm pleased to say it's been renovated and brought back into use. If you go on to the next slide then, Mark, please. This is another property where there were an elderly couple living there. Again, as you can see, there's hoarding activity has occurred there over a number of years then. This was brought to our attention when neighbours started experiencing issues with rodent activity. So we carried out an investigation, initially looking in the gardens, but on closer examination, we could see there was a serious issue with hoarding in this property. Again, unfortunately, this property had to be prohibited, and you'll see later photographs which will show the condition of the property. The residents were then rehoused as well, and this property again was sold, and it's currently under renovation. So we can go on to the next slide, please. So that just shows the rear entrance to that property then. So go next slide. This is another property we dealt with a mother and daughter living in the property then. On speaking to the daughter, the mother had always had an issue with hoarding, but unfortunately, due to the death of her husband, this triggered more extreme behaviour. The daughter was actually a professional working in a solicitor's office, but as you can see, their living conditions are extremely poor there. So we only got involved when the mother was taken into hospital because we had trouble trying to gain access. But the daughter then reached out for us and we were able to access the property. So we served notice here to clear the rubbish from here. And again, due to the condition of it, this property was prohibited, but has now been sold on and is being renovated as well. So you go on to the next slide then. Okay, and that's just again showing that property there. So go on to the next slide, please. So you can just see now, starting to see some of the disrepair in the next slide. And there you can see the disrepair to the roof of that property as well. There was also the bathroom floor had rotted through entirely, and the sink and the bath in the bathroom were just balancing on a few of the floor joists there. So next slide again then. That's just illustrating the disrepair to the roof then. Okay, if we go into the next slide then. This was a case then, you can see in these photographs, it was an elderly lady living here who was fiercely independent. She did have some distant relatives living further afield, but she'd stopped communicating with them. She had a mistrust of GP, social services, but officers were able to visit her and build up a relationship with her. The defects you can see relate to, was a drainage defect, which was the drain was leaking over a period of time, which caused some subsidence and cracking. And in the photograph in the middle, this is the actual building to the left where her kitchen was illustrated. The first photo in the series, what this shows is where a repairer's tried to be affected then by using expanding foam. And this was to prevent entry points to rodents, but unfortunately rats will eat through this, and you can see they've done that. You can see it's providing a access point then for rodents. And the next slide then, please. And this is the lady's kitchen there. What we did with this case, we did manage to persuade her to engage with social services. It did take a number of months for the officers to build up trust. And we were also able to refer her to Care and Repair, who were able to get in touch with her insurance. And pleased to say that a new kitchen was built for her on the back of this property and some other measures installed there then. And also we were able to get in touch with her family and re-establish some connection there as well. If we can go on to the next slide then, please. And this is the earlier property I was referring to where the hoarding was quite prevalent. And you can see there again, disrepair and quite poor conditions that these people were living in then. And the next slide then. And again, please. And that's just further disrepairing that property then. So if you can go on to the next slide now then, Mark, please. So this is the last area work I'm going to talk about. So it's another area where we have a large number of complaints then. So in relation to accumulations of refuse and rodent problems, we sometimes find that residents don't comply fully with the recycling and refuse collection requirements, resulting in these sorts of accumulations that attract rodents. And they can also cause issues to neighbours in respect of odour and flies as well. We have to regularly use our enforcement powers to deal with these cases, but we also work with the waste education officers to improve knowledge and ensure that the residents have all the correct containers and bags as well. Due to some repeat offenders, we're now also undertaking joint working via the problem-solving groups and exploring the use of the community protection legislation by the waste enforcement team in the Vale to deal with these repeat offenders. So obviously you can just see the extent of people just not putting their rubbish out for collection, not recycling on a regular basis there. If you can go on to the next slide then, please. And again then, sorry. And this is just to demonstrate we don't only deal with refuse accumulations on the outside of properties, but in the inside as well. The first two photographs, this was a case where there was a young man living in this property. The neighbours had problems with rodents in their attic, and on going up to examine, it was a terrace property. There wasn't a firewall, so they could see through to the neighbour's attic, and he'd actually started placing his rubbish up in the attic space, causing this rodent problem. Again, notices were served. We gained entry to the property as well, and the conditions we found within the property showed not only refuse in the attic space, but also throughout every room in the property. The last photo in that series relates to a social housing property, and there was a mother and daughter in there with additional needs. With this one, we got the social services and the housing officers in the RSL involved in that particular case. If you move on again, then please, Mark. This relates to the property where the young man was living. You can see there the contents of the fridge have rotted away. There was rodents gaining access to the back of the fridge, and they've stripped the carcass of meat in that particular property. And the next slide again. Just shows, again, is just an example of the poor hygiene within the property. And then the last slide there, Mark. And this is evidence then. You can see the droppings then showing evidence of an active rodent infestation. And in fact, when we were removing the refuse from the premises, there were live rats within the property. So that's the end of my presentation. So I don't know if you have any questions.
All very quiet today. I mean, it's exceptional, isn't it? So, I mean, how many cases like that would you likely to get in a year?
I think of that extent, then maybe 2 or 3 a year are coming up. Then obviously we have different extremes of it, and I have chosen the photographs to demonstrate the most extreme cases we deal with, and not all of them are like that. Some of the hoarding cases we deal with can be in the early stages, and as I said, our officers have been on specialist training, so they can visit and try and engage with the residents, and there's a prevention aspect to it then as well, and involving other voluntary agencies and just trying to support the residents, to prevent situations like that. The cases I've shown were hoarding that occurred over extreme amount of time. There were triggers then. In a couple of them, it was relating to a death in the family then. And that we find is often the case then. And some of the properties we dealt with, we're dealing with highly intellectual people that live in these properties as well. And as I say, sometimes people wouldn't know they lived in those properties because they're smartly dressed, they're presenting well. Say with one gentleman, he was using the facilities of the leisure centre. So, it's a hidden problem, but it is, unfortunately, owner-occupiers are struggling with maintaining their properties as well.
And are we generally successful in preventing them doing it again? The next property we move into.
Yeah, I'd say the majority of cases have been successful, but I am aware of ones where we do that behaviour is repeated, and that is unfortunate with hoarding, is a repeated behaviour. So it's making sure that those support services are in place as well. So it's making sure we connect with the relevant agencies, and that's why the self-neglect panel we have that operates, there's agencies from mental health services, social services, all types of people, the housing associations, and we all get together and we can all take a case, report it, and then we can all sort of give advice and sort of, provide the support that's needed for them then.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is Steve doing a presentation as well? Or?
Yes, I'm here. I can take you through my presentation.
Yes, thanks.
Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Very good. Mark, if you could bring up my presentation, that'd be great.
Yeah, just doing it now, Steve.
Thanks, Mark. I'll just let you know when to move on. Thanks, Mark. I'm sure you'll all agree that the images that Helen showed in her excellent presentation were very shocking. And navigating some of these cases can be extremely difficult. Some of the cases that Helen will have shown you, we will also see in Cardiff. It can take many months, even years, to work through some of these cases. And I think what I'd like to do with this presentation is to give you a fair impression, a snapshot of what our officers need to deal with. And I'm biased, but if I might say, the heroic nature of what they do. They are swamped with a huge amount of work. Some of that work can be extremely complex and can be quite emotionally draining, as I'm sure that you can appreciate. So it's a nice opportunity for me to showcase what they do, because sometimes it can fly under the radar a little bit, I think. Mark, if you can move on to the next slide, please. I just want to give you a very brief overview of the totality of what we do. Cardiff is a very different area to Bridgend and the Vale. We will have some problems in common, particularly around some of the public health issues, filthy and verminous premises, hoarding, rodent problems. But Cardiff is an area with a massive private rented sector. We'll go on to see that Cardiff, in fact, has over 42,500 private rented properties, which is twice Swansea, 4 times Newport. So it is a huge area of what we do. And we deal with the housing health and safety rating system issues that Helen has highlighted. But in particular in Cardiff, massive issue with what we call houses in multiple occupation, somewhere in the region of about 9,000 of those. And a big focus on licensing of HMOs, not just mandatory cases across the city, of which there are around 1,000 or so, but Cardiff has also extended HMO licensing to 2 areas, Cathays and Plasnewydd, bringing many thousands of HMOs within licensing control. Of course, huge number of students, a big issue with 1,800 empty homes in Cardiff. And we deal with statutory nuisances, which is one property, its physical condition affecting another, such as the photo that we see here, which I'll take you through in a moment, but also things like animals being kept in such a way that they are affecting neighbours. And we have a case at the moment where somebody's keeping 35 chickens in a backyard in Grangetown, which is causing a huge problem with flies and odour. And we've got a legal process to follow there. And as we'll show, big problem in Cardiff with rogue landlords who are exploiting tenants. So the photo that you see on the left, as I say, we show you all the nicest photos. This particular case was tragic. I've been doing this job for well over 3 decades. This one still had the power to shock and upset me. There was somebody, very in common with what Helen was saying, that the person lived here, reported to work every day as a bus driver, in perfect condition, ready to go to work. In this particular case, not only was there a hoarding issue, there was a big hole in the roof, so water was pouring in, pigeons had got in, and what you see is pigeon feces over the top of everything. The bathroom wasn't working, toilet wasn't working, etc. This person was rehoused, and the officers in particular who were handling this, who had developed a rapport with this lady, were devastated when she died of a coronary. The good thing is that at least at the end of her days, she was in good surroundings and being cared for, which is testament to the work that the officers had done in improving somebody's life. Can we move on, please? Thanks. Just a snapshot. As I say, I've covered some of this. 42,000 plus rented homes it is now, 9,000 HMOs to be dealt with, an additional 5,000 students pretty much every year move into Cardiff. And as Helen nicely explained, the cost of living crisis, the post-pandemic situation, the housing emergency that we have in Cardiff affects our service. While we aren't the people trying to find alternative accommodation, that task falls to Cardiff Council, and a huge task it is. We feel the fallout of it, where tenants are paying high rents, they're more inclined to complain, they want a route into social housing, and part of that is complaining to us. And we're finding that the relationship between landlord and tenant is becoming more fractious, complaints are more difficult to handle, and we are finding we're caught with the fallout of that dispute. And as Helen said, often while our help is needed, we are being refused access, and builders are being refused access to do repairs. So it's a complex situation. Next, please, Mark. The one thing I touch on here is that we are still in housing recovering from the pandemic, particularly in terms of our HMO licensing service. This is a big area of what we do. Pre-pandemic, we licensed in the region of about 3,500 HMOs. During the course of the pandemic, we were not able to inspect properties, and we were not able to redeclare our additional licensing schemes, which meant that the number of licensed HMOs pretty much halved, leaving us with a huge backlog. I'm pleased to say we're now moving through that, and I'll show you some facts and figures to show you our recovery in a moment. Next, please. Thank you. To highlight the fact that housing choices are becoming more desperate out there, we're finding people not only living in extremely poorly converted properties where landlords are flouting planning and building regulations requirements, converting properties without those safeguards and producing dangerous accommodation. We're also seeing things being used for accommodation that are not houses at all. The left shows somebody living in an abandoned hairdresser's salon, as it was, that had been let by a landlord. And the right shows you a property which had been extended for a larger family by building a shed in the back garden, and we found mattresses in there. Next, please. We can see that the number of service requests is picking up year on year. The number of service requests in total that we get is double this, probably 1,700-1,800 complaints a year. But these are those that required a detailed investigation and an inspection. So you can see that there's a year on year increase in these types of complaints. Next, please. But what I'd like to say is that, and this is in common with the whole of the shared regulatory service, we use our powers. We're not afraid to do that. I think it might be astonishing for you to learn that in the last 6 years, we've closed over 100 properties, whether that be houses or flats, often because the accommodation that's been created by a landlord is wholly unsuitable. And sometimes it's because of severe fire safety risks, and sometimes it's because of extreme disrepair. In that same period, we've served over 1,100 improvement notices on landlords. And we've taken, over the last 5 years, 24 successful prosecutions. And as I'll show you in a minute, I'm pleased to say that after many years of frustration with the courts, I think the penny's starting to drop, and we're starting to see fines that are more appropriate and more punitive. In that 5-year period, 9,500 service requests that we've dealt with relating to property condition. Next, please. Just some evidence that what we do is high profile. These are Wales Online articles relating to some of the prosecutions we're carrying out of rogue landlords. And some of the prosecution work we've done has recently made national press as well. Next, please. Some notable cases recently. We have a property at Blaenlladach Street where we served improvement notices on 4 flats where there were extreme fire safety risks. We carried out a prosecution for non-compliance with those notices in December 22 and got a £10,000 fine. We found that a year later, the notices had still not been complied with, and carried out a further prosecution, at which point the fine was doubled, £20,000 fine. The next prosecution was actually of a rather wealthy landlord who despite his wealth, chose not to obtain a HMO licence. The court, as you can see, took a dim view of that and issued a £68,000 fine, plus £500 in costs, plus a victim surcharge to the maximum on both properties, and also granted the tenants a rent repayment order for the rent that they'd paid while the properties weren't licensed. And the Broadway prosecution was of a serial offender who had extreme management failings at the property, where we had to serve emergency prohibition orders to close all flats. And there was a fine for those management failings in excess of £37,000. So nearly £40,000 worse off. I'm pleased to say that that landlord has now thrown in the towel after about 30 years of abusing tenants. His daughter has taken over the properties, and we at least see the first signs of a better relationship. Next, please. In terms of HMO licensing, I think our recovery post-pandemic is good. Last year, we inspected over 1,100 HMOs. The fact that they're inspected is significant. We're ensuring minimum standards in what are some of the highest risk properties, obviously where you have houses in multiple occupation, you have more people there, fire safety risk goes up, you need to ensure that there are proper space and amenity standards in place. So make sure that electrics are safe, gas safety, etc. And all of these things are assured through the licensing process. So over 1,100 inspections and over 1,245 licenses issued, which is by far our best ever return. That earned us over £330,000 in fee income to support the service. I told you earlier that the number of licensed properties had decreased to 1,800. Because the licenses last for 5 years, while they continue to expire, so we're always playing catch up a bit, we've increased that from 1,800 to 2,800, and we have 200 more drafts to go. So we're well on course to get our total back up to 3,500 licensed properties this year. And as you can see, the backlog of applications is falling as we move through them from 850 to 368, despite the fact that applications continue to roll in all of the time. Next, please. I'm not going to show you too many more horrible photographs, I hope. The filthy and verminous premises issue is prevalent in Cardiff. Next, please. We have probably in the region of about 10 significant cases a year. We have a suite of powers under the Public Health Act, Environmental Protection Act, Prevention of Damage by Pests Act that we can use. But as you'll have seen, a lot of the people in these properties are extremely vulnerable, and often there are mental health challenges in place. So I'm pleased to say that Cardiff Council has established a project called Homespace, and we're working alongside that project, where in having the right people with the right skills, working alongside Cardiff Mind, they're starting to take a different approach where they're trying to talk some of these people into accepting help, which will come by way of a clear up, but also in terms of the mental health interventions and the support that is required in order to help them through this process. Us coming in and doing works in default and removing these accumulations can be extremely traumatic for these people whose hoarding is often as a result of a life experience or a mental health challenge. Us coming in and doing that work can be extremely damaging, albeit that there is a legal responsibility for us to do that in order to protect them and prevent nuisance to neighbours. But if we can work more softly with these people there is the potential for a longer term gain and to prevent recurrence and to most importantly, support that person. So we're looking alongside and we'll be keen to see that project put on a permanent footing and to act as an example that perhaps we can spread across Wales. And as Helen rightly said, we don't deal with these things in isolation. It is about working on a multidisciplinary basis with social services, for instance, in order to try and achieve a good result. Next, please. I'm just going to leave you with one case study, which is currently ongoing. In fact, I got an email about it while we were talking earlier. This is a property on the 8th floor of a high-rise block of flats, privately owned in Cardiff. This is actually the common landing on the 8th floor, and what you can see on the floor is what you think it is. So the stench in this area was overwhelming. There was a fly infestation and the carpets are filthy, which isn't great for the occupiers of this property or the neighbours. In fact, there was a leak coming out of this property, which has left the flats below uninhabitable. Access was refused, in fact, aggressively refused, wouldn't even open the door, and all of our attempts to get in failed, so we had to get a warrant. Clearly, the way we're going to do that, that's a confrontational act. The police won't necessarily act in all cases as our security service, but in this case, they had intelligence and they were happy to come along. We were aware that the gentleman occupying this property was huge and violent and abusive. We got in by way of a locksmith with 3 police officers present. Such was the level of abuse and intimidation. In the end, 8 police officers were present to keep order. The RSPCA were there, and the police and RSPCA between them removed a dog and a cat, who I think were desperate to leave. And over the course of 2 hours, the inspection was completed. Next, please. Thanks. You'll have become quite used to seeing these photos over the last half an hour. And perhaps this is a good thing, what the PowerPoint presentation of this kind doesn't tell you is how it smells in there, which was, I went in a couple of days later and with social services in order to speak to one of the residents, and it was truly overpowering. The flat was full of rotting food, packaging. There was feces all over the floor. Smell is quite overwhelming. We served notices under the Public Health Act and Environmental Protection Act for a clear up, but also to deal with various plumbing issues which are causing a leak below. This case took a tragic turn. The male occupier, a number of days later, collapsed, and ambulance service was called. They found that due to a leg wound, he had sepsis. He weighed over 200 kilos. He was evacuated by the fire service and subsequently died in hospital. I met with his mother, the other occupier, who is also now in hospital, with the benefit of social services. And I must say, in this case, the social services officer from Cardiff was absolutely brilliant and dealt with this lady with such care and patience. We obviously have works in default powers, but what's happening at the moment is that the building manager, by agreement, is carrying out a clearance of this property so that they can remedy the building leak. Although that has hit a little bit of a stumbling block over the last hour, which I hope we can get over. If that doesn't continue, we will have to use our enforcement powers to do the works ourselves. I hope that's the end. Thanks, Mark. I hope, next slide, I hope that's given you a little bit of an overview of the challenging nature of the work, and hopefully has left you with an impression that we're doing some really good work there, and that the the housing services within the shared regulatory service, both at Helen's team and my team, do a hard job, but we're pretty much at the cutting edge of what we do as well, using our enforcement powers. Any questions?
Can't see any hands up at the minute, Steve. I mean, I'd like to say, I mean, you know, I cover Cathays as my ward, and we've been very grateful for the work of your team in some of the issues we've had there, and not just with students. With one particular case, I remember a few years ago that was horrendous.
Yes,
and yeah, and you know, can't thank your team enough for the work you do. And Rent Smart Wales has certainly made a big difference in the views of the landlords. Ruba, do you want to ask a question?
Hello, Ruba.
Hi, and thank you, Chair, and thanks, Steve. Really, just to reiterate Norma's words, really. I mean, I apologise for coming late, but I had another meeting, so I heard sort of half of what you were saying, Steve. And I know the work is extensive, and you're doing much more than you were, a year ago, let alone a couple of years ago, and you're doing that with limited resources. So it is a really, the achievements are huge. So do pass on our thanks to the rest of the team, because it is actually, as you say, you're at the cutting edge of kind of innovative stuff, but also the fact is, this is the stuff that people don't see every day, because it's really part of an we expect these things to happen and be done, and your team get on with it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Those are lovely words that I will pass back to the team.
Thanks, Steve. I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we'll go on to item 5. That's the Shared Regulatory Services Food and Feed Law Enforcement Service Plan 24-25. And this is Christina will take us through this one as well, if you wouldn't mind, Christina. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, this is the final item from me, and one more from Helen. So I'm very conscious of time. And of course, today I didn't want to provide any photographs in terms of poor food businesses, particularly after the 2 presentations that we've just received before lunchtime. That would really put you all off. So today we need to run through the Food Law Enforcement Service Plan. The plan itself is contained in the appendix of the report for you to see. Chair, there are 2 recommendations in this report. Firstly is to approve the Food Law Enforcement Service Plan for 24-25, and of course to provide Helen as the head of service the necessary administrative amendments should that need arise through the year. So you'll all be aware we come to Joint Committee with this report every year because we have a duty which has been delegated to this Joint Committee to enforce food safety legislation as detailed within the report. As part of the Food Standards Agency Framework Agreement, we're required to produce a food safety service plan setting out our arrangements of how we discharge our duties. And so the plan that you have in front of you is produced every year to fulfil that requirement. The plan is ultimately there to describe how we ensure that the safety and quality of the food chain from farm to fork is to minimise risks to both human and animal health. And it describes how we achieve this through an inspection programme, dealing with complaints, providing advice and education, undertaking sampling, and of course taking enforcement action where necessary. We articulate the demands on what is a extremely busy service. You know that, our risk-based approach and programme and the resource we have available for delivering the work. Page 19 of the plan onwards details our proposed intervention programme through the year. That's all in line with the Food Law Code of Practice. And this year we are aiming for full completion of that programme. You'll note that page 37 of the plan makes it clear that in order to deliver the full requirements of the FSA Code of Practice, which is a statutory function, the service requires a further 6.5 full-time equivalent officers. And as such, we, as you know, we operate as a deficit. This year, you'll know again that we are still utilising contractors to bridge that gap between that deficit and utilising funds from a vacant post currently in the Bridgend Vale team to pay for that contractor resource. Without them, we will not be able to fulfil the requirements of the Code of Practice. You'll note that the plan also reviews our performance against last year. And, it was a good year for us in terms of clearing a backlog of inspections resulting from COVID days where officers were obviously unable to inspect. That stands us in really good stead for the year ahead and is providing a bit of a reset for us. But as I said, we're still very much reliant on contractors to bolster our figures from what is a very, very busy service. Page 46 of the plan also details some successful prosecutions. We brief you on these regularly. Whilst prosecution for us is always the last resort, it's of course it is necessary for those businesses who fail to comply. So as I said, I'm not proposing to go through this report line by line. It's a hefty report for your reading. But again, Chair, just to go back to the recommendations in terms of the report, and that is to approve the Food Law Enforcement Service Plan and to authorise Helen to make the necessary amendments should that need arise. But of course, happy to take any questions should any members need.
Any questions from anyone before we look at the recommendations? No? Shall we move then to the recommendations? As Christina said, we're asked to approve the 2024-25 Food Law and Feed Law Enforcement Service Plan and to authorise the Head of Shared Regulatory Services to make administrative amendments to the plan should the need arise. Can I have a proposer and seconder?
I'll move, Chair.
Thank you. And a seconder? Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. There we are. And all in favour? Yeah. Nobody. Nobody against that. Thank you very much, and thanks for your report, Caroline, again. And incredible amount of work done to get to the level you are now with all the inspections after the COVID period. Congratulations to everybody doing that work. And now should we move on to item 6, which is the review of the Shared Regulatory Services Compliance and Enforcement Policy. And it's Helen will present on this one.
Thank you, Chair. And last of the papers for today. Very conscious of the time for everyone. You will be familiar with our compliance and enforcement policy. It was actually first brought to Joint Committee in 2016. It's come back in stages since for the addition of 3 subject area specific annexes, which provide some detail on these very specific areas of enforcement. And those existing annexes in relation to food, another one in relation to feed and health and safety. We brought the whole policy back to Joint Committee, you may recall, in September of last year, 2023. And the purpose of it coming back to Joint Committee at that point was following a full review of the compliance and enforcement policy to ensure that it remained fit for purpose and was up to date. It was reviewed by a barrister who concluded that it was fit for purpose. It simply needed some updates in relation to changes in the law and best practice. And those were incorporated, and Joint Committee approved that revised compliance and enforcement policy at that point. So the purpose of us bringing it back to you again today is to ask for authorisation of an additional 2 annexes. I mentioned Annex 1 to 3 earlier, and I've included a link in the report to to those existing annexes if members would like to see them. What I've appended to this paper is simply the additional 2 in draft form, which we would like approval to go live with. So the new Annex 4 sets out the full range of enforcement options available when dealing with non-compliance in the private rented sector. And really good timing to have Helen and Steve present to us today. And I'm really grateful to both of them for what they've done in conveying some of the areas that they work in and some of the challenges. But in their presentations, you saw that the full range of working with people, trying to get compliance, and then moving along this spectrum, if you like, to more formal actions and ultimately enforcement actions through court if the need arises. So because of the specialist nature of our housing enforcement work, we feel that this needed to be noted in detail in an annex, a standalone annex, under the compliance and enforcement policy. So that is the Annex 4 that you have in front of you. And then the second of the draft annexes, which we would like approval for, is in relation to our minimum energy efficiency standards work. This is quite a brief annex, but it reflects the fact that this legislation is a little bit unusual in that the enforcement sanctions that it provides are quite limited. It makes provision for monetary penalties, amongst other things, with a formula or factors to take into consideration when deciding exactly what the level of that monetary penalty should be. So the purpose of Annex 5 is to explain that, to be completely transparent about what those enforcement options are, and with regard to the monetary penalty, what the starting points are for the different penalties that can be imposed, and then how the final amount or level of that penalty is calculated, taking into account things like the risk and the harm caused and the culpability of the offender. So I hope that's a quick run through why we're bringing the compliance enforcement policy back to Joint Committee today. So the recommendations are for Joint Committee to give its approval for the revised Shared Regulatory Services Compliance and Enforcement Policy and accompanying annexes to be used by SRS, to recommend the adoption of the revised policy by the respective councils for those functions undertaken by the shared service on their behalf, and to authorise the Head of Shared Regulatory Services to make minor administrative amendments and updates to the revised policy once implemented, should the need arise. And obviously more than happy to take questions, Chair.
Do we have any questions? I think the annexes look, fairly clear what you're trying to do, and yeah, nobody. You've obviously explained it well. There's no questions on it. Can I ask then for someone to move that we accept the recommendations?
I'll move those, Chair.
Thank you. And a seconder, please. And we're all in favour of that, are we? No objections there. Here we are. That's our recommendations moved. Item 7 are any urgent business, and so is item 8. And as far as I'm aware, we don't have any additional items. But no, nothing? No, lovely.
No, sorry, Chair, just to confirm, there are no other urgent items, part 1 or part 2.
Thank you very much. And so that concludes our meeting. Thank you all for attending.